When I walked into that courtroom, my ex-daughter-in-law, Jessica, was already gloating. Her face said it all. "You're just a sad old woman, Eleanor. You're going to lose." She was there to strip me of my rights to see my grandchildren. But when the judge looked up, he didn't see the little old lady Jessica expected. He saw me, and the look on his face, the absolute shock, the frozen silence that fell over the entire room. That was the moment I knew no one, especially not Jessica, had any idea who they were really up against. This is how they found out the truth. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am 68 years old. I live in the suburbs of Scottsdale, Arizona, in a beautiful Spanish-style home that I own outright. On paper, I'm a retired registered nurse widowed 7 years ago after losing my beloved husband, David. That part is true. What isn't on the paper is the life I lived before I became just Eleanor Vance, the retired nurse. My life now centers on the brutal legal battle with my former daughter-in-law, Jessica. She divorced my son Andrew a year ago and is now attempting to use the court system to cut me off entirely from my 2 grandchildren, 8-year-old Lily and 5-year-old Ethan. They are the light of my life, and losing them is simply not an option. Andrew is my only son. He's 40, a talented architect, and while he tries his best, he's emotionally devastated by the divorce and often feels powerless against Jessica's calculated aggression. He relies heavily on my strength. Jessica is 38. She's sharp, attractive, and works as a financial consultant. She views people, including family, as assets or liabilities. Since the divorce, she's decided I'm a liability, an irritating link to her past. She sees me as nothing more than a wealthy, elderly woman whose estate she couldn't fully control in the divorce. She expects me to be weak, pliable, and ultimately defeated by the legal costs. She has absolutely no idea that I have played a different game on a much higher level for most of my adult life. My gentle exterior. The soft voice and the kind eyes people often praise is a carefully cultivated shell. When David and I married, I was already carrying a tremendous amount of weight from my past life. Before I was a nurse, I was Eleanor Ellie Rossi, and my family was deeply involved in sensitive, high-stakes matters back east. The kind of business that required absolute discretion, meticulous planning, and an understanding of power dynamics that would terrify most people. My deepest fear, the one that governs all my actions, is exposure and vulnerability. In that life, being seen as weak or revealing your true connections could be catastrophic not just for you, but for everyone you loved. We learned to blend in to maintain an impeccable, utterly boring public facade. This intense need for secrecy and control became an emotional blueprint, even after David and I deliberately chose a simpler, safer life in Arizona. Me switching careers to nursing, the habit of emotional restraint remained. This is why I'm so intensely private and sensitive to any perceived probing or control. When people try to pry, my entire posture stiffens. My jaw clenches so tightly, I sometimes feel a dull ache in my temples. My eyes, which I try to keep soft, instantly go guarded, adopting a flat, watchful quality. It's an involuntary reaction, a throwback to decades of self-preservation. Jessica, with her corporate entitlement and aggressive demands for financial transparency, was constantly poking at this old wound. Every time she demanded an audit of my accounts, or condescendingly questioned my ability to care for the children, I felt that terrifying chill of vulnerability. I saw her actions not just as typical daughter-in-law meddling, but as a severe threat to my carefully constructed peace. I feared that if she pushed hard enough, my past, the one I buried to protect Andrew and the children, might surface and destroy the stable life David and I built. My over-the-top quiet intensity when discussing the grandchildren wasn't merely grandmotherly love. It was the ferocious, controlled instinct of a woman who knows what it takes to protect her own and is terrified of the consequences of failure. Before the divorce and the subsequent legal maneuvers, the daily dynamic between Jessica and me was characterized by a superficial, transactional politeness. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't openly hostile either. It was a truce maintained for the sake of Andrew, and more importantly, the children. Jessica was highly ambitious and frequently traveling for her consulting job. This often meant she needed reliable, flexible childcare. Stepped in happily. I loved having Lily and Ethan over twice a week and every other weekend. During these years, my emotions were overwhelmingly joyful and Huanhai joyful. I felt a deep calming sense of purpose when the children were with me. I would move through the house with a lightness in my step, my hands often gently kneading dough for cookies, or holding Ethan's tiny hand as we explored the garden. Jessica, for her part, was appreciative in her own way. She wasn't effusive, but she was grateful for the free, high-quality care. She would occasionally leave a designer candle or an expensive bottle of wine on my counter. When she dropped the children off, she would often greet me with a bright, if slightly strained, smile. "Thank you so much, Eleanor. I couldn't survive this week without you," she'd say, sometimes giving me a quick, light hug that felt more like a social obligation than true affection. This setup created an environment of light, gentle interaction. We talked mostly about the children's school and activities, strictly avoiding any deep personal subjects or financial matters. I felt a sense of quiet fulfillment, believing that our shared devotion to the children created an unshakable bond. My posture around her was often relaxed, my expression generally soft and welcoming. I believed, perhaps naively, that the goodwill generated by my help was enough to ensure a benign, if cool, relationship. However, even during these seemingly peaceful times, I sensed her subtle, constant assessment. I would catch her eyes quickly, sweeping my living room, taking in the furniture and the artwork, calculating my worth. It was a fleeting, controlled look, but it was there a tiny, unsettling undercurrent to her sunny demeanor. This professional detachment, this constant valuation, created a fragile dynamic. We were allies of convenience, not family, by true emotional connection. And that fragility was exactly what allowed everything to collapse when the divorce put my position at risk. The illusion of peace dissolved the moment Jessica filed for divorce. The conflict immediately centered on the children, and inevitably control over my access to them. Initially, I offered support, genuinely believing that in the face of family upheaval, Jessica would value my consistency. I told her I would maintain my schedule, ensuring the children's routine remained untouched. My posture was open, my voice steady, offering a harbor in the storm. Jessica, however, saw vulnerability, not support. She saw a lifeline she could twist into a leash. The first subtle indication of her malice came during a tense phone call about the visitation schedule. Andrew was temporarily moving into a small apartment, leaving Jessica with full control of the main house and the children's routine. I suggested picking the children up at their usual time Tuesday afternoon. "Actually, Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I think we need to cut back. Lily is starting soccer and Ethan needs to focus on his reading. I don't think they need so much distraction right now." Distraction. The word hit me like a tiny frozen dart. My weekly care, my time, my love reduced to a mere inconvenience. My throat tightened instantly and my jaw instinctively clenched. I felt that familiar old cold rush of fear and defense. I countered carefully. "Jessica, the children thrive on routine. They look forward to our time. This isn't distraction. This is stability, which they need now more than ever." Her mask slipped for a fleeting moment. Her voice turned hard, revealing the sharp, calculated edges beneath the veneer of concern. "With all due respect, Eleanor, their stability is my concern now. And frankly, your home is too far away to justify the drive given my new schedule. We'll be reducing your time to one Saturday a month. You can pick them up at noon and drop them back by 6 p.m. And I'd prefer you didn't take them off my property." The restriction was punitive. 6 hours once a month, Supervised tethered to her address, it was a calculated move to break the bond and assert complete dominance. My hands resting on my lap, instinctively curled into tight fists. This wasn't about the children. It was about power. She was punishing me for the divorce and for my financial independence, which she couldn't touch. The final straw came when she formally filed for a modification of the custody agreement, effectively asking the court to limit my access even further, citing my advanced age and inconsistent mental state. That last phrase, inconsistent mental state, was a direct cold-blooded shot at my core fear of exposure. She was using the legal system to weaponize my privacy. When I received that court document, I felt the air go out of my lungs. My entire posture, usually held erect with quiet dignity, slumped momentarily under the weight of the betrayal. Then an icy calm settled over me. Jessica had made a profound miscalculation. She had gone beyond mere annoyance and crossed a line into existential threat. She was no longer just Andrew's ex-wife. She was an adversary who had activated my deepest, most primal defense mechanisms. She had poked the bear, and she had no idea the kind of bear she was dealing with. My mind immediately shifted from grandmotherly love to cold, calculated strategy. The absolute turning point was not the custody filing itself, but the specific phrase Jessica used, inconsistent mental state. I was sitting at my kitchen table, a spot usually reserved for helping Lily with her homework, with the legal document spread out before me. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from cold, focused rage. That phrase wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was an echo of the past, a direct threat to the bedrock of my chosen identity. It implied I was unstable, incapable, and ultimately an unreliable witness to my own life. This wasn't about the house or the money anymore. It was about destroying my carefully constructed safety. I pushed the papers away, stood up slowly, and walked to the wall safe hidden behind a landscape, painting David and I bought years ago. I rotated the dial, hearing the familiar series of clicks, a sound that used to represent security, but now represented necessity. I pulled out a heavy, slightly worn leather box that hadn't seen daylight in over 2 decades. As I opened the box, the dry, leathery smell of aged paper and metal filled the air. Inside were 2 things: a diplomatic passport long expired, but still bearing my maiden name, Eleanor Rossi, and a single heavy brass key attached to a tag with a series of numerical codes. Holding the passport, I saw the woman I used to be, sharp, cold, and utterly anonymous. I had buried her, but Jessica's reckless cruelty had forced me to resurrect her. My emotional state transformed instantly. The soft, grieving grandmother evaporated, replaced by the calculating professional who managed dangerous situations with quiet efficiency. My posture straightened completely. My breathing slowed, and the tremor in my hands ceased. I felt an ice-cold clarity flood my system. I knew then that relying on Andrew or trying to appeal to Jessica's better nature was useless. This was a direct existential attack, and I had to respond in kind, using the tools I swore I would never touch again. I walked to my home office, powered on the secure computer, and pulled up an encrypted communications program. I inserted the numerical code from the brass key tag. The screen prompted me for a password I hadn't used since 2003. I typed it in, the old combination of letters and numbers flowing effortlessly from memory. The screen lit up with a single, secure email address. I composed a message that contained only 3 lines using archaic formal language that only a specific few would understand. It was an activation signal, a request for information and assistance under the most extreme circumstances. The final line of my message was a chilling directive: confirm the current disposition of local assets and legal connections. Need a full profile discreetly obtained on Jessica L. Hayes. Authorization code AITA. I hit send. In that moment, Eleanor Vance, the retired nurse, ceased to be the protagonist of the story. Eleanor Rossi. The woman who handled problems that required surgical precision and absolute secrecy had taken over. The legal battle with Jessica was about to shift from a low-stakes family dispute to a high-stakes information war, and she had no idea the power she had just unleashed. The response to my coded message was swift and silent. Within 24 hours, the secure communication channel pinged. The contact was designated only as source, but the efficiency and detail of the package they delivered confirmed their origin, a network that specialized in information protection and operational readiness assets that David and I had established decades ago. Source immediately provided a comprehensive dossier on Jessica L. Hayes. This wasn't just a background check, it was a full, deep dive profile. It covered her financial consulting business, detailing not only her public successes, but also the subtle, ethically gray methods she used to push clients into high-commission products. More importantly, it uncovered vulnerabilities, a history of undisclosed business debt from an earlier venture, and several aggressive borderline harassment complaints from former colleagues that had been quietly settled out of court using non-disclosure agreements, NDAs. This deep insight allowed me to understand her real motivation. Jessica wasn't just mean. She was financially stretched and driven by greed. Stripping me of access wasn't just about custody. It was about isolating Andrew and positioning herself to potentially pressure him into getting access to my inheritance early. Armed with this information, I replaced my initial passive family lawyer with a recommendation from Source, a sharp, highly aggressive litigation specialist named Ms. Evelyn Cole. Ms. Cole understood high-stakes, discrete battles. I didn't tell Ms. Cole everything, but I provided her with enough verifiable public-facing information, the settled complaints, the debt structure to shift her strategy. The will? We immediately filed a sealed addendum to my will, stating that any attempt to contest my mental capacity or aggressively seize control of my assets would immediately disinherit the aggressor and place the entire estate in a protected trust managed by a neutral third party with limited disbursements only for the grandchildren's education and health until they turned 35. This was the ultimate financial deterrent, robbing Jessica of any long-term motive. The custody case. Ms. Cole immediately challenged Jessica's claims of my inconsistent mental state by submitting certified evaluations from 2 top geriatric psychiatrists, unequivocally stating my superior cognitive health. The final, most critical action was subtle preparation for the courtroom. I knew the information I possessed was too explosive to be introduced carelessly. Ms. Cole and I planned a sequence of events designed to create maximum psychological impact. We decided to wait until the court hearing, the day Jessica expected to deliver the final crushing blow against me. I instructed Ms. Cole to file a specific highly detailed motion right before the hearing, a motion that required the judge's personal immediate review of certain sealed documents related to Jessica's undisclosed past actions and the NDA settlements. I needed to be there when that specific judge read that specific motion, because I knew long before Jessica or Andrew did exactly who that judge was. I didn't need to speak. I just needed to show up, let the information do the work, and let the judge recognize the subtle, powerful connection. The morning of the custody hearing was cold and gray, but inside me the atmosphere was one of icy control. I wore a simple dark suit, expensive tailored but utterly unremarkable, designed specifically to convey an image of conservative, financially stable, and rational composure. Jessica was already seated at the petitioner's table, flanked by her lawyer, Mr. Stern. She looked triumphant, a sharp, predatory smile playing on her lips. She barely glanced at me when I entered, assuming I was the easily defeatable adversary she had planned for. Andrew sat beside me, pale and nervous. He squeezed my hand. "Mom, just stick to what Miss Cole said. "Don't let her provoke you," he whispered. I squeezed back, offering a small, reassuring nod. The bailiff called the court to order. Then Judge Harrison walked in and took his seat on the bench. He was a man in his late 60s, known for his stern, no-nonsense demeanor. He looked tired as he shuffled the pile of motions on his desk, preparing to dive into the tedious family dispute. "Miss Cole, my lawyer, stood up first. Your Honor, before we proceed, we filed a sealed motion 5 minutes ago pertaining to the petitioner's credibility and fitness, which we believe necessitates your immediate personal review." Judge Harrison frowned, annoyed by the delay. He took the thin manila envelope and sighed, leaning back to tear the seal. He pulled out the first page, Ms. Cole's formal motion, and then the attached exhibit, a heavily redacted document and a photo. As he scanned the page, the routine exhaustion in his face began to drain away, replaced by an expression of subtle recognition. He flipped to the attached photo and the associated affidavit of confidentiality. At that moment, I raised my eyes. I didn't smile. I didn't move. I simply met his gaze. My expression was perfectly neutral, but my eyes conveyed a silent, profound message. I know who you are, and now you know who I am. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Judge Harrison's eyes widened slightly. His jaw went slack and he froze mid-read. The room, Andrew's nervous fidgeting, Jessica's lawyer shuffling papers, all vanished into a complete, horrifying silence for everyone involved. Jessica, utterly confused by the judge's reaction, leaned over to her lawyer and whispered loudly, "What is it? Did she just try to bribe him?" Judge Harrison ignored her. He didn't look at the lawyers. He didn't look at Andrew. His gaze was fixed solely on me, Eleanor Vance, the retired nurse. It was a look that mixed astonishment, deep respect, and perhaps a flicker of fear. He lowered the document slowly, his hands rock steady. He cleared his throat, his voice now low and powerful, completely dropping the formality. "Mrs. Vance," he said, using my married name, but the tone of address belonged to the past. "Would you approach the bench, please?" Jessica started to protest, but her lawyer yanked her arm down hard. I rose calm and deliberate and walked toward the judge. As I approached, Judge Harrison leaned slightly forward, his eyes still holding mine. He whispered 2 words, words that sealed Jessica's fate and confirmed my true identity to the one person who mattered. "Ellie, what are you doing here?" I reached the bench and looked down at Judge Harrison, or rather at Robert. I hadn't seen him since a formal function in D.C. over 20 years ago, back when he was known by a different title. The familiarity and the shock in his voice confirmed everything. "Robbie," I whispered back, using the familiar name from our shared past. "I'm protecting my grandchildren, and I'm defending the peace David and I built." I gestured subtly toward Jessica with my chin. "She is attempting to compromise my security and mental competency through false allegations." Robert's expression shifted from astonishment to grim determination. He knew my code of ethics, and crucially, he understood the context of the highly redacted documents my lawyer had submitted. The attached photo was a decades-old picture of a formal legal commendation I had received, signed by a mutual contact he respected deeply. The photo wasn't for proof of identity. It was a silent signal to him that I was operating in protection mode and that the situation was far more serious than a simple family squabble. He leaned back, his professional mask snapping back into place, though his eyes remained sharp and serious. He addressed my lawyer, Miss Cole, loudly enough for the whole court to hear. "Miss Cole, the sealed exhibit your client provided is highly irregular, but deeply concerning. It suggests a potential pattern of misrepresentation and harassment by the petitioner, Jessica Hayes, related to confidential business dealings and prior contractual obligations." Jessica's lawyer, Mr. Stern, was already on his feet, sweating slightly. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. These are business disputes settled years ago by NDAs. They have nothing to do with her fitness as a mother. Judge Harrison looked directly at Mr. Stern, his voice suddenly commanding. They have everything to do with her credibility, counselor. When a litigant attempts to declare a grandmother mentally unfit, using unverified claims, and then we discover a history of using harassment and settlements to avoid accountability in her professional life, the court must question the petitioner's motive. He turned his attention back to Jessica. Her triumphant smirk had crumbled. She was pale, her eyes darting nervously between her lawyer and the bench, finally realizing that the ground beneath her was collapsing. Ms. Hayes, Judge Harrison continued, his voice devoid of emotion. The court is aware of your attempts to dramatically reduce Mrs. Vance's visitation rights, citing reasons this court now views as unfounded and potentially retaliatory. Furthermore, your attempt to weaponize the court system against a financially solvent family member, coupled with the information presented in the sealed motion, suggests this case is driven less by the children's best interests and more by your personal agenda. He didn't need to use the explicit details of the financial fraud or the NDAs. The mere acknowledgement that he had reviewed them, combined with the power of his recognition of who I was enough. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel once. The petition for modification of visitation is denied. He then did something completely unexpected. Furthermore, Mrs. Vance, based on the documented stability and necessity of your presence in the children's lives, the court hereby grants you expanded formalized visitation rights, including 2 overnights per month, enforceable immediately. The cost of Mrs. Vance's legal fees shall be paid by the petitioner, Ms. Hayes. This court will not tolerate the harassment of grandparents. Jessica gasped, jumping half out of her seat. It wasn't just the loss of the case. It was the financial penalty, the expanded rights, and the absolute public humiliation. She had expected to win without a fight, and instead she had been meticulously dismantled by the very person she underestimated. I simply stood there receiving the judgment with the same quiet composure I had maintained throughout. As I walked back to my seat, I gave Andrew a single, genuine smile. The past had served its purpose. It had protected the present. The atmosphere in the courtroom immediately after the gavel hit was a stunning tableau of victory and shock. Jessica was arguing fiercely with Mr. Stern, her voice rising in a desperate, panicked whisper. Andrew, my son, was staring at me, his eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly turning into awe. For me, the feeling was not triumphant jubilation, but a profound, deep breath of liberation. I had secured my grandchildren, protected my boundaries, and silenced the threat of public exposure, all without firing a single visible shot. My past, the part of me that dealt in precise surgical action, had served its purpose one last time, ensuring my retirement remained peaceful and private. As we walked out of the courthouse, Andrew finally found his voice. "Mom," he stammered. "Judge Harrison, he knows who you are, right?" "What is going on?" I stopped, placed my hand gently on his arm, and gave him the most honest answer I could. "Robert Harrison. Andrew David and I spent half our lives building a normal life. But before that, I did work that required absolute caution and secrecy. Robert Harrison is one of the people we collaborated with long ago." I continued, my voice low and firm, ensuring he understood the gravity. Jessica made a serious mistake trying to publicly prove I was mentally unfit. When she did that, she touched a network that no one should ever touch. I used that network to ensure she could never threaten your and the grandchildren's stability again. That's why the judge acted so quickly and decisively. Andrew looked stunned, but also relieved. The years of feeling helpless against Jessica had ended in one dramatic, unassailable victory, orchestrated by his seemingly gentle mother. He didn't ask for details. He just accepted the power I had shown. That evening, back in my quiet, safe home, I performed the final act of closure. I went back to the safe, pulled out the leather box, and wrote a final simple message to Source, thanking them and confirming the successful resolution. Then I sealed the brass key and the expired passport back inside. I put the box away, shut the safe, and replaced the landscape painting. I stood in the center of the living room, feeling the sun stream through the window onto the familiar, comforting furniture. The shadow of Jessica and the cold anxiety she had instilled was finally lifted. I was free. Free from the fear of her control. Free from the necessity of silence. And most importantly, free to be the simple, loving grandmother I always wanted to be. The past had been a tool for survival, but now Eleanor Vance could finally fully enjoy her present. The profound relief of victory was immediately succeeded by a quiet, gnawing sense of unease. I had won, yes, but at what cost to my carefully guarded sense of self? Sitting by the fireplace that evening, the room bathed in a soft, flickering orange glow. My hands held a mug of chamomile tea, but they felt cold and strangely foreign. I was supposed to feel joy, yet all I felt was the residual chill of having resurrected Eleanor Rossi. I kept replaying the courtroom scene, the look in Robert Harrison's eyes, the whispered code, the immediate shift in power. I had intended to bury that past, the calculated moves, the strategic leverage, the cold separation of emotion from action. But Jessica's desperate cruelty had forced me to bring those tools back into my present life. My entire being was built on the premise of leaving that life behind for peace, and yet to save my peace, I had to momentarily become the woman I vowed never to be again. My internal conflict was a battle between the necessity of survival and the yearning for simplicity. I had to do it, the hard, pragmatic voice of Eleanor Rossi argued. Jessica was an existential threat to your family and your sanity. She forced your hand. I had secured the most precious things, the grandchildren and Andrew's peace through superior force. But the softer voice, the voice of Eleanor Vance, the retired nurse who found joy in gardening and simple acts of care, countered with deep sadness. Did I really need to use such extreme leverage? Did I overreact? I looked at my hands, which had spent years gently tending to patients, and realized those same hands had just orchestrated the swift, ruthless destruction of a younger woman's legal standing and career trajectory. While Jessica certainly deserved a severe lesson in boundaries, the clinical efficiency of my response left a metallic, bitter taste in my mouth. The deepest ache came from the look in Andrew's eyes, the awe mixed with confusion. I had protected him, but in doing so, I had revealed that his mother was a person of unexpected, intimidating power. I worried that this knowledge would create a new subtle distance between us. Would he ever look at me again, without wondering what other secrets I held, what other connections I could leverage? I had traded one form of stability, anonymity, for another security, but I feared I had paid for it with a piece of my emotional connection to my son. I closed my eyes, seeking the comfort of David's memory. He always understood this duality in me. Now alone, I faced the mirror. The retired nurse, the loving grandmother, was inextricably linked to the strategist. The only path forward was to integrate this powerful part of my identity, not deny it, and ensure it served only the highest, most ethical purposes of protection, never revenge or personal gain. The past was a tool, and I would lock it away once more, trusting that I had secured the right to a quiet future. My lingering internal conflict finally yielded a critical realization. True power lies in choice, not control. I had spent too many years fearing my past, afraid that it would surface and destroy the quiet life I had built. But when Jessica forced my hand, I understood that the past was not a burden. It was a resource I could choose to deploy to protect the present. The single most significant lesson I learned was that controlled transparency is essential for healthy family relationships. My absolute secrecy about my past left Andrew reeling from the shock of my sudden display of power, creating confusion and potential distance. I realized I couldn't demand full connection with my son and grandchildren while concealing such a fundamental, powerful part of my nature. My first mature decision was to redefine my relationship with Andrew. A few days after the court hearing, I invited Andrew over for dinner. Not in the kitchen, but in my home office, the room where I had sent the activation message. I explained in slightly more detail, though, still with boundaries about the network, and why I needed to act so quickly and secretly. I did not apologize for winning, but I apologized for not preparing him for that unexpected display of strength. Andrew, I said, placing my hand over his, David and I chose this quiet life so you could have a normal childhood. I regret that I never had the courage to tell you about Ellie Rossi sooner. Son, I will not use this power to interfere in your life unless there is a clear threat to the grandchildren's safety. You have the right to your independence, and I will honor that. My honesty opened up an unprecedented, genuine dialogue. He admitted he was astonished, but also profoundly grateful. He understood that his mother was not a frail old woman, but a protector of extraordinary capability. Our relationship shifted from one of a fiercely protective mother and a somewhat dependent son to one between two mature adults who respected each other's boundaries. Before the conflict, my core philosophy was hide to protect. This made me passive and vulnerable to attacks from opportunistic people like Jessica. Now my philosophy had shifted to protect through controlled strength. I learned that owning my power does not mean constantly using it, but knowing that it is available when necessary, and its very presence acts as a formidable defense mechanism. Regarding Jessica, I chose not to pursue her further. She was already paying my legal fees, had lost control over the visitation schedule, and received a severe reprimand from the judge. I had achieved my goal, long-term stability for my grandchildren, and the neutralization of her threat. I didn't need to ruin her career. I only needed her to understand that I was untouchable. My true growth was not learning how to fight, but learning how to stop fighting with myself. Eleanor Vance and Eleanor Rossi finally achieved coexistence. I no longer feared my past. I had harnessed it, transforming it into the silent guardian of my future. So after all the legal maneuvering and the resurrection of a past I swore was dead, what is the ultimate moral of this story? It's not about secret power. It's about understanding your non-negotiable value and refusing to let anyone, especially family, define you or limit your access to love. My mistake for many years was allowing my intense desire for a quiet life to be misinterpreted as weakness. I tried too hard to be the nice, gentle grandmother that I became an easy target for someone like Jessica, who preys on perceived timidity. She thought I was a fragile liability. She learned I was a formidable fortress. The most important takeaway for anyone dealing with entitlement boundary issues or aggression from family members is this: you must establish your boundaries early, clearly, and with absolute conviction. 1. Identify the threat. Pay attention to the subtle cues. If someone in your family treats you as a transaction, not a relationship, if they constantly assess your worth, demand resources, or ignore your emotional needs, that is a red flag. They are testing your perimeter. 2. Draw the final line. You must know what you will never compromise. For me, the final line was the attack on my mental fitness and my access to my grandchildren. When Jessica crossed that boundary, the time for diplomacy ended. That is the moment you must stop pleading and start strategically defending. 3. Harness your resources. Your secret weapon doesn't have to be a classified network. It is your right to protect yourself. It can be a top-tier lawyer, meticulously documented evidence, or the simple empowering strength of walking away and legally sealing your assets. Be prepared to defend what is yours with the same intensity that the aggressor uses to attack it. I may have had the advantage of an unusual past, but every person watching has the power of their present self, the right to choose who they let into their life and what they let them take. My greatest source of joy now is watching Lily and Ethan thrive in the peace I secured for them. The quiet in my home is not passive. It is peace hard-won, fiercely protected, and absolutely non-negotiable. Never underestimate the quiet strength of the person you think you know, and never ever let someone else dictate the price of your peace. So that is the true story of how I defended my home and my sanity from an attack that came from within my own family. It was a harrowing, expensive, and deeply painful journey, but I emerged stronger, wiser, and fundamentally free. My house is secure. My life is my own. And while the relationship with my son is now built on a foundation of honest respect, the threat is permanently gone. I shared this deeply personal and difficult journey with you today because I know many of you watching are struggling with similar silent battles with in-laws with adult children, or with partners who feel entitled to what you have built. I hope my story empowers you to identify those red flags, to draw your lines in the sand early, and to never hesitate to protect your physical and emotional well-being, even if it means confronting those you love. If my story resonated with you, if you have ever felt that crippling fear of being pushed aside or taken advantage of, please hit that like button. Your support helps me know that sharing these hard truths is worthwhile. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I'll be sharing more insights into navigating difficult family dynamics and reclaiming your independence in retirement. And finally, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to fight to defend your boundaries? What was your turning point? Leave a comment below and share your own experiences and advice. We are a community here, and we can help each other through these storms. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for giving me the space to tell my story. I'll see you in the next video.